Hey guys, Dr. Barry here. I've got a special guest with me, Dr. Paul Saladino, author of the brand new book, The Carnivore Code. What's up, Doc?
What's up, everybody? Thanks for having me on, my friend. It's good to see you.
My pleasure, my pleasure. It's always fun to chat with you no matter where in the world we are. We're not together today, but thanks to social media, we kind of are. So what have you been up to?
Well, I wrote this book called The Carnivore Code. It's super exciting. We're going to talk about it today. I've been thinking about the carnivore diet and thinking about human health and thinking about what the roots of chronic illness and autoimmunity are. We did a live a while ago talking about psychiatric disease, and we can talk about that today if people want. But, that's what I've been up to, trying to think about how we become healthy humans, what sort of things prevent us from becoming healthy humans, and what sort of things enable us to become really deeply healthy humans, and how we can reverse chronic disease and illness that we are so often told, as you know, is incurable. I gave you a shout out in my book because you said something to me. I mean, in all of the conversations we've had, you have so many kind of good, wise sayings. And one of them I included in the book from Dr. Barry was that in medical school, you and I were both taught which pill to give, not what causes an illness and not know how to fix it. And so those are the type of things that you and I are both thinking about. We don't really want to focus on which pill to give for an illness. We want to know what is causing something. And it's so fun and so meaningful to share information that helps people reverse those things.
Yeah, 100%. So many people think that you're born with the genes you're born with. You're born with the immune system you're born with. If it's attacking your body, we don't know. It's just genetic. There's really nothing you can do about that. Or if you've got a weak immune system, well, I don't know. That's just who you are. That's how your genes are. There's nothing you can do to change that. And I completely disagree with that. And I think you do too. And we can talk about any and all of this stuff, but it's up to you, brother, wherever you want to take this conversation.
No, I couldn't agree more. I was talking to one of my friends last night who has non-specific autoimmune symptoms, and she doesn't fit into lupus, but her symptoms look a lot like lupus. And what that means is that she's seen 17 specialists, and they all kind of look at her labs and they go, well, we don't know what this is. And another sort of wise saying that I've heard in the media as I've done interviews is that, Western medicine is all about naming diseases. It's about the what and not the why. And if Western medicine can't name something, then we don't know which pill to give.
Right.
And then
if we can't name it, if there's not a diagnostic lab test for it, if there's not an FDA approved pill for it, then doctors are really not interested in it. And it's not due to laziness or evil. It's just that our paradigm is there has to be a test, there has to be a name, there has to be a set of diagnostic criteria, and there has to be an FDA approved prescription medication you give for it. Otherwise, it really feels like you're stepping out of your box and you're stepping into quicksand. And most doctors would get very uncomfortable with that. And rightfully so, you should, because you definitely don't want to step into the woo-woo zone or the magic zone. But at the same time, there are many, many things that modern medicine does not understand. There are many, many things that modern medicine got wrong and is still getting wrong. And only by stepping out of that box and at least sticking your head up out of the box and looking around, if nothing else, that's how we're going to change these things and fix these things and correct the lies that we've been told and the myths that we currently believe.
And so often patients are just kind of marooned on a desert island. I mean, this friend of mine that I was talking to last night said, the doctors just say, go away. They say, we don't have anything for you. We don't know what to do for you. And they just kind of throw their hands up and they go, sorry, we ain't got anything for you. And that's why are we doing that in medicine when we're missing this whole huge toolbox of diet, right? This whole huge toolbox of dietary discussions, nutritional interventions, lifestyle interventions. We're missing that whole thing. And so that's what the book is about. That's what the Carnivore Code is about. It's out now on Amazon, you guys, thecarnivorecodebook.com. Check it out. But I got so interested in the carnivore diet, as you know, a few years ago when my own eczema did not get better on a Paleolithic diet. And I've often said to people, look, if you're watching this video and you are thriving, so happy for you. I'm gonna give you an electronic high five. I would never tell anyone how to eat or
100%.
Don't change a thing. If you are thriving, don't change a thing. I'm super excited about offering people ideas around animal-based diets, around the carnivore diet, and we're going to talk about that today, for people who are not thriving, for people who are in a space where they're not getting answers, for people who are like my friend with this lupus-like non-specific autoimmune syndrome, who are being told by doctors, we don't have anything for you. And you and I are both saying, oh, yes, we do.
Absolutely.
Oh, yes, we do. And let's start with food. We definitely have something for you. And it may not be what you are being told mainstream and nutritional, because unfortunately, the mainstream nutritional advice now is going more and more toward plant-based diets. And we can talk about why that is and why it's so misleading. I talk about that in my book. I talk about why meat has been cast as a villain and plants have been held up as our savior. And so the two real important messages from my book, The Carnivore Code, are number one, like we talked about before this video, meat is healthy for humans. It's been wrongly vilified, and you and I both want to exonerate it. Meat, well-raised meat especially, belongs in every healthy human diet and is essential for optimal function of our brain, our immune system, our body. Meat is so healthy for humans. It's just so healthy for us. It's always been a part of our human existence. It really, the first part of my book, I talk about where we've come from in anthropology, and I talk about how meat was essential in the growth of the human brain. And that was a big part of it. And it's always kind of been this linchpin in our nutrition. And by meat, I mean, meat and organs and the whole animal. So I'm using the royal meat. And then the second piece of the equation that I talk about in the book is that plants exist on a spectrum of toxicity. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying that everyone needs to be on a full carnivore diet, but I want people to understand that there is a toxicity spectrum in plants. Plants and animals have coexisted for many, many, many years, and plants have evolved spikes. They've evolved chemical defense mechanisms. So they have physical spikes like rosebush thorns or cactus spines that'll poke us, but they have chemical spikes as well. And those chemical spikes are what I dig into in the book, things like oxalates, lectins, isothiocyanates, phytoalexin molecules. These can really harm some people more than others. And so I wanted to paint this picture. Meat is good for us. Plants can harm some of us more than others. And in the book, I sort of lay out that plant toxicity spectrum and say, hey, if you can tolerate plants, great. If you can't tolerate plants, maybe that's the piece of the equation that everybody's missing. And that's really the underlying hypothesis of the Carnivore Code, is that so many people who are going to their doctors with autoimmune disease, inflammation, issues that are chronic, may be having inflammation and gut issues and gut damage from plant toxins. Let's create a healthy, sustainable way to pull those out of the diet. Let's get those people better, and then see if we want to reintroduce, we can, or just leave them out of the diet. How do we construct the diet with the most nutrients and the fewest toxins? And that can be, in my opinion, a carnivore diet or a carnivore-ish diet, which is including the least toxic plant foods. I know you occasionally eat avocado. That's one of these least toxic plant foods. Berries, we can talk about all of it.
Yeah. So first of all, let's unpack all that, because I think all of it is so very, very important. But let's start with the myth, the lie that eating meat is inflammatory to the human physiology, that it is dangerous, that it will cause heart disease, that it will cause colon cancer. Let's talk about all that and how, first of all, there's nothing in paleoanthropology that backs that up whatsoever. And I don't know if you know this, but I've become a huge paleoanthropology student.
It's great.
I got books about paleoanthropology, pathology, dentition, nutrition. I've got all these books because paleoanthropologists, they know without a doubt what we ate 100,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago. It's not up for debate. They can check the strontium, the carbon, and the nitrogen stable isotopes, and they can tell you not only what did this tribe eat meat heavy, was it seafood or was it red meat? Did they eat C3 plants or C4 plants? Were they eating wheat or were they eating corn? They literally can tell this from the bones and from the teeth of these remains. Whether the remains are 1 year old or 100,000 years old, you can tell that. And so no one in the paleoanthropology community believes that we were ever plant heavy unless we were starving and we had no choice. And I really think that human beings are low carb mammals by design, and that running in ketosis, that's our default energy system, is burning fat for fuel. We also have developed this secondary system where we can burn glucose and carbohydrates for fuel. But I really think that's the secondary source. I think all mainstream nutrition has that backwards. They think that being in ketosis is the starvation mode. If you can't get carbs, then you have to run on fat. I think they've got it backwards. What do you think about all that?
I couldn't agree with you more. And I talk about all those studies in the book. I talk about the stable nitrogen and carbon isotopes from Neanderthals and Homo sapiens living in Northern Europe 40, 50,000 years ago. I talk about bone studies in the teeth from 2 million years ago. And you're right, they all kind of point to the same thing. Our ancestors were eating a heck of a lot of meat. And the majority of our diet was from meat. One of the things we know looking at currently living hunter-gatherers is that the amount of meat they eat is directly proportional to the amount of meat they can get. The more meat they can get, the more meat they eat. And Weston Price, in his famous book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, has noted exactly that. And in the book, I talk about the contrasting of tribes that he noticed in Africa, in a similar region of Africa, between the Kikuyu and the Maasai, with the Kikuyu eating mostly animal-based, or more plant-based and less meat, and the Maasai eating almost entirely animal-based. The Maasai were bigger, they were stronger, they were more robust. And it really is, that's exactly the hypothesis, the idea that I advance in the book. Plant foods are survival foods. Yes. And, we can eat them from time to time if we want. We can eat them for flavor and texture and color and variety, absolutely. But really know what are the most toxic plant foods, because those can be harming people. So you're exactly right, Dr. Berry. And I talk about this in the book in detail for people that want to see it. I've created a great graph in the book that shows kind of the human brain size change. And there was this really sharp inflection in the size of the human brain that about 2 million years ago, right when we started hunting animals. And so all these good nutrients from animals, the EPA, the DHA, the choline, the carnitine, the carnosine, all those, so important. They're only really found in animal foods. And that was, I think, and I think you agree with this, the real catalyst for us becoming the intelligent, resourceful beings we are today.
Yeah, I think if we had continued eating the plants, we would still be small-brained little primates, probably still living in the jungle somewhere. But for some reason, made that turn. Some people think that it was some catastrophic event that happened on the earth, and other people say we just don't know. But at some point, we became a meat-heavy species, and our brain size and many, many other things about our anatomy changed. And so I don't think we'd be the humans we are today without meat. And I don't know if any anthropologist would argue with that at all.
Well, as I talk about in the book, there was actually a species called Paranthropus.
Yep.
And, if you go back and look at the anthropology, there was, Homo habilis and Homo erectus. And Homo erectus appears to have, Homo habilis appears to have gone to Homo erectus, appears to have gone to Homo habilis and Paranthropus. And Paranthropus went extinct. And we can look at the teeth of Paranthropus, and they were eating more plants, and then Homo erectus was eating more animals. And so there's a real divergence there. And I think you're absolutely right. The other thing I point out in the book is that our ancestors, our primate ancestors, were eating fruit and leaves for 60 million years before, before we sort of came into the fray as hominids. And so eating those foods didn't do anything for us. And then there's the last piece of the equation, which is so fascinating, that we can correlate human brain size very strongly to B12 levels in the human body. Where do we get B12? Exclusively from animal foods. And the only way we're going to get a lot of B12 in our diet is by eating more animal foods. So you can do these studies. There's this amazing study that I talk about that was done at Oxford, where they looked at people, they looked at the size of their brain. The people with the lowest B12 had the smallest brains. And that's a scary thing, because you can see, if you look at human brain size evolution, in the last maybe 30 to 40,000 years, our brains have been shrinking. And this correlates with the advent of agriculture. And so is it still shrinking? Are people who do plant-based diets going to have a smaller brain? It's very intriguing to say this. Like, B12 and the nutrients in meat are needed for big brains. So that's good. Let's wrap back to your original thing that you said. Where has this crazy notion come from that meat is bad for us? Where does this come from? And I'm sure most people listening to this will know what the next word out of my mouth is going to be, but it's epidemiology.
Yeah.
Epidemiology is how things got so confused, right? Epidemiology, I just want all the listeners and watchers to understand this. Epidemiology is observational science. It's a survey. They take people who are living and they take 100 of us and our friends and they say, Paul, Dr. Barry, what did you guys eat for the last 10 years, right? And I might say, well, I ate a lot of hamburgers and, you and I are healthy, but if we surveyed 100 people on the street and asked them what they ate for the last 10 years, it will come as no surprise to people listening to this that the people who say they've eaten hamburgers for the last 10 years are people who are fighting the mainstream nutritional advice and probably ignoring all of it, which means they don't go in the sun, they don't exercise, they're more likely to smoke, right? And they're more likely to not have communities or to do other rebellious behaviors, not have regular medical care. So are we even surprised in the least that when we do that sort of observational study, those people look like they're unhealthy? But that can only tell us about correlation.
Right.
Correlation. It's not going to be able to make a causative inference. And it should never have been conflated to that. It should never have been suggested to do that. But in the mainstream media, there's so much irresponsible reporting. Yeah. And they'll say eating meat is associated with a higher mortality. And to the layperson, it sounds like, wow, that's bad. But you know what else is associated with a higher mortality? Not exercising, not being in the sun, riding a motorcycle, smoking cigarettes, not having a community. And the people that eat more meat, because they're ignoring health advice in the mainstream, tend to do all of those things as well.
Yeah. So and make no mistake, both Dr. Saladino and I understand the value of observational research. It does serve a valid purpose. The whole point of observational research is looking for trends and looking for patterns. But then you're not supposed to put a story on CNN and Fox News and say, oh, look, meat causes colon cancer. That's not the point of observational data. When you think you see a correlation that might be meaningful, then the next step in that is you're supposed to design a controlled experiment to investigate that possible correlation. And then when the results of that study comes back, then you can say with some degree of authority, this looks like this correlation is real. Right. But all of the kind of the second level research that's been done on meat always comes back a wash, or it comes back that meat's actually good for you. But the news media, they're not so hip on reporting that. They kind of forget to run that story, but they're quick to run the story that meat will cause sweaty butt crack or whatever else, whatever it's going to cause.
Right. I mean, have you ever seen the media report an interventional study? I've never seen the media report an interventional study on this stuff. It's so crazy
because you can't get fabulous claims out of that, because that research mutes all the fabulous claims. Because Dr. Saladino knows this, but about 80% of observational studies, when they do seem to show a correlation, when they seem to, because that's all you can say about it, it seems there's a correlation. When you actually look at that with a controlled interventional trial, 80% of the time that perceived correlation doesn't exist.
Goes away.
Over half of the time. And so observational data, trying to make a recommendation based off that is worse than flipping a coin.
It's so bad. And I think that it doesn't get reported in the mainstream media because they would have to answer for all of the things they've done. How can you guys be saying one week that meat is good for you and 1 week that meat is bad for you? And they would just be like, wait a minute, we have to present a concerted front. People want to hear that what they know is correct or what they've been doing is right. And so if the media went out and produced a story which said, hey, there's an interventional study from 5 years ago or 10 years ago that shows that meat is good for you. And I talk about this study in the book and multiple like it, where you replace carbohydrates in the diet. So they replaced carbohydrates in the diet with 8 ounces of red meat. And what do you see? You see improvements over 4 to 8 weeks or 12 weeks in inflammatory markers, in insulin resistance markers, and in terms of weight loss. How can that be if red meat is so bad for us, right? And so I debunk all those myths in the book.
Yeah, you do such a great job of the book. I got an advanced copy, guys. And when I was flying home on the plane, I had actually printed out the PDF, and I was like flipping and reading these pages and highlighting and making notes. And I'm like, ooh, I've been looking for this reference forever. I'm going to look this up as soon as I get home. And it's an excellent book. It's just sciencey enough that here's the research that he talks about, and he's got a footnote like, here, go look this study up. But it's also very understandable. You do a brilliant job of breaking down the science and breaking down the medicine and saying, okay, here's the big words, but now this is what that means. And I think that was brilliantly done.
Thank you so much. I was trying to channel you because I feel like you do such a good job of this every time we talk, and people will say that to me, like, a lot of the words you use are very complex for us. And I think, okay, I knew that when I was writing a book about the carnivore diet, right? The carnivore code, here it is, you guys. I knew that I was writing a book about the carnivore diet. It's such a controversial thing that I had to make it rigorous, or as rigorous as I could. The book has over 600 references. They're all in the back in like really small print. So they're saying, flash your book, Dr. Barry.
Let me move my Redmond's real salt and my electrolyte drops. There's my book. Put your book up, Paul. We'll have a book off.
Book off,
there
right?
Lies my doctor told me in the carnivore code. These on your bookshelf, and you're not as smart as you could be otherwise.
If you guys get both of these books, you're gonna be healthier. I guarantee it. If you're not, I will personally come to your house and make you dinner.
And both of these books, they arm you with they give you a shield, but they also give you bullets, because when you go to your doctor and say, hey, I'm eating meat, or I'm eating keto, I'm eating carnivore, you're liable to get some feedback that's negative. But if you go armed with a shield and with a spear, which these two books are, you can say, well, actually, doc, what about this study that Dr. Saladino talks about, where they actually got healthier when they added meat to a plant-based diet? How does that make sense? You're recommending to me I should eat plant-based. I should eat the DASH diet. I should eat the American Diabetes Association diet. All these diets are primarily plant-based, 70 to 85% plant-based. And you're telling me to eat 1 or 2 ounces of meat a day, or in some cases a week? Really? What about my DHA, doc? What about my zinc? What about my EPA? What about my B12? Where am I getting all that? Am I just going to have to take an armload of supplements too if I eat the diet you recommend? How does that make sense?
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. And in the book, I arm people with all of the studies to say, like, hey, look, there's a reference here. Show your doctor this study. Your doctor can look it up. My book has a lot of graphics in it too. I contrast a lot of things in the book so people can see the graphics. I'll show you one right now about the Framingham study, which I think is particularly illustrative with regard to lipids, because a lot of people have questions about LDL on ketogenic diets and all this stuff. And it was so interesting for me during the course of writing the book to look at these two graphs, right? So on the right side of the screen, or maybe on the viewer's left side of the screen, you'll see a graph that shows the correlation between LDL levels and heart disease. But on this other page, what you'll see is when I break that down, when you break that information down into stratifying it by HDL. So over here, when you stratify by HDL, you can see that the risk of heart disease when you have high levels of HDL is essentially zero as LDL goes up. It's a little bit complex. Again, check out the book if you want to see that. But so many of these myths get broken down in my book. And just like Dr. Barry, I wanted to write a book for people about ways that what their doctor is telling them might be very misleading. And so I love somebody's making a comment. Unputdownable. Thank you.
That's a good word. I love it. I'm going to use
Unputdownable. The other thing I want to point out is that there is a study in the book that I mentioned, and I want people to show this to their doctors as well, and educate them and educate themselves, in which they replaced saturated fat in the diet with polyunsaturated fat, right? So they took saturated fat out. They took 9 to 10 grams of saturated fat per day out and added 9 to 10 grams of polyunsaturated fat. And what happened? The lipid markers got worse. The oxidized LDL and the LP(a), which is lipoprotein (a), and I talk about both of those in the book, they both went up. And if you see oxidized LDL go up and LP(a) go up, whatever you're doing is the wrong thing. So decreasing saturated fat, increasing polyunsaturated fat, oxidized LDL, LP(a) go up. How can saturated fat be bad for us?
Right. Yeah. And all the research guys, all the research about saturated fat is bad for you. It goes hand in hand with all the research that doctors used to quote saying that eating cholesterol is bad for you. It'll raise your risk of heart disease. All the research is meaningless. And there's actually been several studies, huge studies. One was a huge control study that you could talk about, Doc, if you want to. It was a control study where the people were in old folks' homes and mental hospitals, where we know what they ate. They had to eat the diet that was given to them. They were a captive audience, right? And that was back in the day, I think it was in the 70s, when they were trying to prove that eating a low-fat diet was the best diet. And when they crunched all the numbers and got all this data back, it did not show that at all. It actually showed that the patients who had the saturated fat in their diet did better. They lived longer. They had better mental ability. They had fewer heart attacks and strokes. And the poor, I don't know if he was a PhD or an MD researcher, he was like, well, shit. And he didn't even, I think he published it in some throwaway journal in Norway. But then he just put the big magnetic data tapes down in his basement or in his attic and never published it in a reputable journal, because if he had published that back then, he would have been massacred. He would have been driven out of the field of research. And so finally, some modern researcher contacted his son. You've heard this story, right?
Yeah.
Hey, do you still have the original data? And the son was like, I don't know. And he found it in the basement in a cardboard box. He found all the magnetic tapes. And he gave it to the researcher, and they crunched all the numbers. And sure enough, the saturated fat group blew away the polyunsaturated fat or low fat group on every single marker of health and optimization. And I think you talk about that study in the book.
I think I might have. And so the reason that saturated fat gets vilified is twofold. Like you said, it's epidemiology, it's observational research, because saturated fat can be a lot of things, right? Saturated fat used to be also trans fat. It's recently been separated into.
Right. And very often in the older studies, they would group saturated fat along with trans fat. And we all know now, even mainstream knows, that trans fat is horrible for your health. But in some of the old studies where it shows that saturated fat is bad, it's actually the combination of saturated fat and trans fat.
Exactly.
That's what they were talking about, but they don't make that clear in the study. And so it looks like saturated fat is bad. And
how do you make saturated fat? You make saturated fat by how do you make trans fat? You make trans fat by hydrogenating vegetable oil. They shoot a whole bunch of hydrogens out of vegetable oil. All the polyunsaturations get hydrogenated. That's what makes trans fat. And you get, instead of a cis configuration around a double bond, you get a trans configuration around a double bond. That's really bad for humans because we've never seen it. And so this is one of the key points that I talk about in the book, is that when humans ingest things that are outside of our operating system, whether it's plant molecules or trans fats, they don't really play well with our biology. And so this is another one of the points that I'm raising in the book is, hey, look, for a lot of people, if you're having trouble and you're not getting better, these plant molecules are outside of your operating system. They look foreign, just like trans fat looks foreign to humans. And that can cause our cells to get damaged, our immune system to get activated. And it's just really a problem for people.
Absolutely.
So you want to try and eat things that your body can recognize. I talk about this sort of analogy to computer programs or cars in the book. You want things, for a Tesla, you got to put Tesla parts in a Tesla. And for a lot of people, when you try and put Honda parts in a Tesla, it doesn't work. And that begins what we're doing with trans fat, or for a lot of people, with these plant molecules. So don't be misled by epidemiology with regard to saturated fat. And then another really big piece of this goes back to the cholesterol story. I don't think we fully understand yet why ketogenic diets, why low carb diets raise LDL. But what we do know is that generally these diets lower oxidized LDL and they lower Lp(a). But what does mainstream medicine focus on? LDL. They put the blinders on to everything else. They're not going to look at your HDL. They don't care if your triglycerides are super low and your HDL is really high and your triglyceride to HDL ratio is low. That's the most important metric, but everyone ignores it because we're so LDL focused. And so anything that raises LDL is a problem for us. And saturated fat appears to raise human LDL. Now, that's a whole problematic thing. That's what we're trying to really change this paradigm. Me and you and Dave Feldman and Ivor and everybody are really trying to change this. We can't be LDL centric or we will be so misled.
Yeah. And the average doctor all they focus on when it comes to your risk of heart disease is LDL. And some of them who are really behind in the reading focus on total cholesterol and LDL. They know that triglycerides mean something, but they've forgotten their physiology. And they know HDL is kind of important, but they've forgotten how important. And many doctors won't even check a hemoglobin A1C at all in your annual labs. And 95% of doctors don't even know to check a C-peptide to see how hard your pancreas is having to work to produce insulin to keep your blood sugar normal based on the amount of carbohydrates you're eating. And so let me do my A1C C-peptide commercial and get that out of the way. If you are over the age of 30, when you go to your doctor, demand a hemoglobin A1C and demand a C-peptide, because with both of these labs, you get a very global picture of not only are you eating too many carbs, but also are you making your pancreas work too hard because of the carbs. And with those two numbers, any doc can order them, and they're very inexpensive if you have to pay cash for them, which you may have to do. But those two numbers, along with the lipid panel and a few other things we can talk about in another live, that's going to give you a global picture. And then you can ask intelligent questions like, yeah, doc, I know my total cholesterol is a little high, and I know my LDL is a little high, but look how great my triglycerides are. Look how high my HDL is. Look how low my A1C is. Look how normal my C-peptide is. Aren't those bigger risk factors than just an elevated LDL? And even if your doctor disagrees with you, what you're going to do is make your doctor think. And when enough patients say that to their doctor, that doctor's going to go, what the hell is up with this C-peptide HDL trial? I'm going to have to Google this tonight when I get home. And then you woke up the student in your doctor, because all doctors should be lifelong students and teachers. That's what we're supposed to be doing, but they forget that. They think their job is to check for LDL and write a prescription for statins. That's literally what they think they're doing a great job if they prescribe more statins than any other doctor in their community. They think they are the best doctor in town. They're not evil, they're not dumb, they're not lazy. They're just operating under a false paradigm, and you're going to help me change their mind.
We're trying so hard. And again, I talk about all that in the cholesterol chapter in the book. It's a really involved chapter. You guys can show it to your physicians if they're still in that old school paradigm. It's just it's so damaging to people. And as I talk about in the book, statins are not the best medications. We know that statins tend to make people more violent, more angry, because it turns out cholesterol is a valuable molecule in the brain. Imagine that. And if you inhibit the production of cholesterol in the human brain, humans get angry. So that's not a good thing. And there are multiple types of statins that cross the blood-brain barrier. These are the lipophilic statins. And those are associated with increased rates of Alzheimer's too, and dementia and anger. And if you look at the primary prevention trials with statins, total mortality doesn't change. And in fact, for a lot of things, it goes up because people die of other things when they take a statin. We know that statins tend to make people a little more diabetic. Well, that's not
absolutely. Yeah, they lower your testosterone and raise your blood sugar, but they lower your LDL. So
they lower your LDL. That's the only thing we care about is LDL. If you have a physician, if people listening to this have a physician who looks at triglyceride to HDL ratio, you give that person a high five, and you send them, you bring them a steak, because they are amazing, and like Dr. Berry said, we just need to help other physicians understand there's more to this than we were all taught in medical school.
Exactly.
I'm a little younger than Dr. Berry, although he looks very young these days. He's aging backwards. Pretty soon we'll look the same age, and you will look a day older than me anyway. Right. So basically, if your physician is savvy enough to do these tests, a hemoglobin A1C, a C-peptide, you have an amazing physician, and you should bring them flowers and a ribeye steak and give them a hug. If your physician is not doing that, then that's what we're hoping to do. Give them a copy of Dr. Berry's book, give them a copy of my book, let them know that there's other information out there. And hey, yes, we need to be looking at LDL, but it's not the whole story. And as I talk about in my book, and I'm sure you talk about in your book, if you are insulin sensitive, which you will tell with the hemoglobin A1C and a C-peptide, your LDL, it's totally probably not a problem at all if you have an LDL that rises on a ketogenic diet. And in my book, I talk about why that is. There's a shared pathway with the formation of ketones in the human body, and saturated fat seems to, raise LDL, but it's not in a bad way. And so circling back to that study I mentioned, you guys, when you decrease saturated fat in your diet and you increase polyunsaturated fat, oxidized LDL goes up, Lp(a) goes up, but guess what happens to LDL? It goes down, right? So and that's the other thing. If your doctor is looking at oxidized LDL and Lp(a), man, that's huge. Somebody's asking, what is that list of tests Dr. Berry gave us? Hemoglobin A1C, C-peptide would really be an adjunct to any lipid panel. The one thing I'll say about hemoglobin A1C is that you can calculate the life of your red blood cell. And many physicians may not be aware of this. You can get a reticulocyte count, and you need to get a reticulocyte count. Again, most people don't need to worry about this, but if you're worried that the hemoglobin A1C looks spuriously elevated, which it can do on ketogenic diets, you can calculate the life of your red blood cell. And there's metrics for this. I've talked about it on other podcasts. But what appears to happen is that when we are in ketosis, when we are low carb, the red blood cells appear to live longer, and that can spuriously elevate the A1C. I've seen some people with hemoglobin A1Cs of 5.6 who never have a fasting glucose, have never had a glucose that goes much above 103 in the whole day. So you can't have an A1C of 5.6 if your glucose never goes above 103. Hemoglobin A1C is supposed to be a running 90-day average of your blood sugar, but if your red blood cells live longer, it can look like it's higher than it really is. So in that case,
the doctor's going to order a complete blood count, which is going to have the reticulocyte count and the other things needed to estimate, is this guy's red blood cells living 80 days, 90 days, 110 days? Because I totally believe, Paul, that when you're eating a fatty meat heavy keto diet or a carnivore diet, your red blood cells are going to live longer. Number one, because they're not getting glycated as much, because you're not eating as many carbs, but also they're just built of better fats. And that's something that I talk about a lot. Every cell of your body has a cell membrane, and it's a phospholipid bilayer, and it's basically made of fat and cholesterol. And so if the only fats you're eating are canola oil, corn oil, soybean oil, safflower, sunflower, peanut oil, then you're giving your body inferior fats to build those cell membranes with, and you're going to wind up with inferior cells. Those cells are going to die sooner. They're going to have a higher cancer risk. They're not going to function as properly. They're not going to be able to use ATP or produce ATP as efficiently. So you're going to have energy problems. All these things happen when you don't build your body out of the proper fats and the proper proteins. Either fatty meat heavy keto or carnivore is going to give you all the essential fatty acids and all the essential amino acids that you need to build an optimal body.
And there's a whole chapter in my book. This was probably one of the most enjoyable chapters to write. It's chapter 8. And the title of the chapter is, it's debunking, debunking plant foods as superfoods. Are plant foods really superfoods? No way. And I debunk that myth in the chapter. And what I say is that when we look at the nutritional content of animal foods versus plant foods, animal foods win hands down. And there are many nutrients that are found in animal foods that can only be found in animal foods. People know about B12, but the list is long.
Yep.
Creatine, carnitine, choline, anserine, which is an amino acid I haven't talked about much, taurine, B12, K2. Wow, that's like 10 nutrients that make us really healthy humans that are only present in appreciable quantities in animal foods.
Yeah.
So I love what you're saying there, Ken. Like, if you want to be built out of the right things, if you want to be built out of good building blocks, you have to give your body good building blocks. If you want to build a Tesla, you got to get Tesla parts. Where do you get Tesla parts for a human? From animal foods. And again, I'm not saying that you have to be completely carnivore. And in the book, I want to talk about this plant toxicity spectrum. I created this toxicity spectrum to help people realize, hey, some plant foods appear to be more toxic than others, and we can unpack that. You don't have to be completely carnivore. You can be if you want to be, but occasional plant foods or small amounts of the least toxic plant foods is totally fine. But again, we want to let people know, number one, animal foods are good for you. They're wrongly vilified. They're wrongly criminalized. And number two, plant foods exist on a toxicity spectrum.
Let's talk about that spectrum, because people who aren't in science, they don't understand that literally everything in the universe, there is a distribution curve.
Yeah.
Right? There's a bell curve for that. Whether you're talking about the height of humans, or the weight of tomatoes. There's a distribution curve for every single thing in the universe. And Dr. Saladino opines that there's also a distribution curve for the toxicity of plants. And I think this is a compelling argument. And I think that's why some people, when they come to keto, they do amazing on keto, because I think they fall on the left-hand side of that curve. The toxins in plants, they either develop defenses against it or a way to get around it, much like some of us can drink milk and we don't really seem to respond because we're able to persist with the lactase enzyme even into adulthood. But other people, if they even look at milk, they're going to be in the restroom paying for that. And I think there is a spectrum of toxicity in the plant kingdom as well. Tell us your thoughts about that, Doc.
Yeah, so in chapter 12, which is the biggest chapter in the book, I got this plant toxicity spectrum graphic, which is over here. And it shows you, in my opinion, again, it's an opinion, but it's based on kind of my clinical experience and the science that I talk about in the book, which plants are more toxic or less toxic. And I think that for a lot of people, a ketogenic diet in general is valuable for two reasons, right? The first is that I think we've all been in carbohydrate-based metabolism our whole life. And it's very good for us to spend some time doing fat burning. That's a very valuable thing for humans, right? And the other thing is, like you're saying, ketogenic diets often cut out some of the most toxic plant foods. I think some people may not do as well on ketogenic diets because there are some foods I consider to be toxic that are still in some ketogenic diets, like almonds and nuts. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. But I think that ketogenic diets cut out a lot of the more toxic plant foods for humans, and especially cut out a lot of the processed foods that are high in carbs.
Yeah, and my opinion is that grains are the most toxic of all plant foods you can eat. Grass seeds, basically. And I think that obviously the plant is trying to protect its babies, which are the seeds. It doesn't want you to eat its babies because then you break its reproduction cycle. And so that's why I think grains are the most toxic of all the plant kingdom. Do you agree with that, Doctor?
I agree. And I expand that a little bit. I talk about seeds, plant seeds being the most toxic because all of these are plant babies. And I think that of the seeds, which include seeds, grains, nuts, and legumes, they're all seeds. The legumes and the grains are the most toxic. But some people, I think, have trouble with seeds and nuts as well. And I noticed that personally, that I had trouble with nuts and seeds for my digestion as well. I had a raw vegan phase. People may not know this about me. It was many years ago. I was 30 pounds lighter, and it was muscle mass that I had lost, not fat. I've always been pretty lean. So I was 30 pounds of muscle lighter, right? And so it's just crazy to think that when I would just eat all this almond, and I had so much gas and so much GI upset. And I thought, man, I'm eating the best foods. This is raw vegan. It's all almond based. And just really problematic for me. So if people are having digestive issues on a ketogenic diet, think about seeds and nuts as well. If you're doing good, I think they're much healthier than the grains and the legumes. But beans and legumes, lectins and digestive enzyme inhibitors, really problematic for people. And it's so interesting because I've been learning a lot about veterinary medicine recently. And one of the concerns in veterinary medicine right now is that these grain-free dog foods cause dilated cardiomyopathy in pets. When you really dig into it, if you take grains do not belong in pet food, period. Right. If you guys have dogs or cats, you don't want any grains. And I'm actually, we've got some exciting stuff happening on that front too. But grain-free dog food, when they take out the grains, they put in legumes. Yeah. So grain-free dog food has like peas and other things, right? Why would you feed a dog peas? Right.
Yeah, and in my opinion, that's pet abuse. If you're feeding your cat anything but meat, that's pet abuse. They are
for your dog carnivores. And think about your dog too. Like beans are toxic for dogs. And so what happens is when we feed dogs beans, they get taurine deficient. Yeah. When we get taurine deficient, they get a dilated cardiomyopathy.
And here's a great example, Doc, of the paradigm that I talk about. Paradigm means way of thinking. And so I've actually read articles by vets talking about the grain-free dog foods giving dogs dilated cardiomyopathy. Right. And their conclusion is, grains are good for dogs. We should go back to feeding them grains. And it's like, no, No, that is not what that means. It means that dogs are facultative carnivores. They need mostly meat and maybe a little bit of veg here and there, but they do not need grains for sure. And this also means that you can check pea protein off the list too. They also don't need that.
And that's
both are bad for dogs.
It's the pea protein that's causing the dilated cardiomyopathy in dogs by causing a taurine deficiency.
Right. It's not the lack of grains, people.
No.
It's the addition of pea protein, which is also very, very unhealthy for your dog.
And for humans too. And so
Yes.
what do we talk about? Taurine is one of those magical animal nutrients that we as humans, we can make a small amount, but if we want to get more taurine, we can get it from animal foods. You can't get taurine from plants.
It doesn't exist in any plant.
It doesn't exist. And so it's my opinion that dogs, as you said, are facultative carnivores. Dogs don't need any carbohydrates. There's a whole thing in Texas, the Keto Pet Sanctuary. Dogs don't need carbohydrates. They're fine without carbohydrates. Just like
we have 3 little ankle nippers in the house, and they eat exclusively meat. Every now and then I'll give them a little liver. They love that. They'll eat egg yolks, but they won't hardly eat egg whites, which I find fascinating.
Isn't that interesting?
Our dogs have not eaten a plant in probably 2 years unless they slip and get something that's soaked in bacon grease off Nisha's plate.
And I bet they're thriving.
Oh, they love it. They're happy. They're healthy. Their coats look amazing. They run and play. They do not have diabetes or fatty liver or dilated cardiomyopathy because they're eating the proper canine diet.
Exactly. And I don't talk about the canine diet in my book. I talk about the human diet.
Right.
It's such an interesting analogy. Maybe my next book will be about the canine carnivore code or something.
Right.
But it's an interesting idea, right? Legumes are toxic. And I think that the reason that beans and peas cause this dilated cardiomyopathy, cause this taurine deficiency in animals is lectins. And I talk about that in my book. There's really good evidence that lectins in legumes harm our gut. And you can't get rid of all of them by cooking. You can try your darndest and pressure cook and soak. But beans are very highly defended plant babies. They are just really booby-trapped.
Yep.
You could maybe eat them in a pinch, maybe eat them in a survival situation, but you do not want to make those the majority of your diet. And then also returning to the plant toxicity spectrum, there are a lot of leafy greens that we have been told are good for us. And I just want to raise the idea that maybe they're not so good for us. Things like kale. We know kale accumulates thallium. I actually had a guy that I met at the last White Oak Pastures event, right? That had thallium toxicity from eating a huge kale smoothie every day. Thallium toxicity, right?
Yep.
What else is in kale? Isothiocyanates. These are goitrogens. They prevent the absorption of iodine at the level of the thyroid. If people are eating lots of iodine, you might be able to tolerate kale, but I don't think it's adding anything to your diet. And so,
and so many people talk about kale as a superfood.
Exactly.
And that annoys me to no end. When you call any plant, any berry, any herb, any root, I don't care if it came from the Himalayan mountains or the Amazon jungle, it is not a superfood. The only superfoods on the planet, in my opinion, are liver from an animal. That's a literal superfood. Maybe brain is a superfood. Paul eats more brain than I do. I don't dislike it. I actually like it, but I just don't have access to it. But those are literal superfoods. And you can also call liver a multivitamin. I think that's an absolutely accurate way to describe it.
And one of the, in the book, I've got a chart here that compares, all of the nutrients in the different foods. And you can see blueberries, kale, meat, liver, salmon roe, and egg yolks. And it's incredible when you look at how much nutrient value is in liver and even muscle meat. Just so much of that they are the absolute superfoods. They are the highest of almost every nutrient out there.
Yeah. And let's, me and the doctor, we're going to drop a revelation on you guys today. I'm going to let you do it, Doc. I want you to tell people how much vitamin A is in a carrot.
Right. A lot less than you think. No vitamin A is in a carrot. Zero. Beta carotene. And as I talk about in the book, your body has to convert beta carotene into vitamin A. You can't use beta carotene in the human body. This is the operating systems concept, Tesla parts. You can't use Honda parts in a Tesla. If you want to use a Honda part in a Tesla, you got to take it to the smelting factory, melt it down, and make it into a Tesla part.
Right. So where are we going to get our vitamin A if we can't get it from kale and carrots and tomatoes? Where will we get our vitamin A?
Liver and egg yolks.
Liver and egg yolks.
And so when you see a sweet potato or when you see a carrot and it says it has X amount of vitamin A, it doesn't have any vitamin A. It has beta carotene. Now humans can do the conversion, but the conversion is very slow. Yeah. And a lot of people have polymorphisms and enzymes that do this. And in the book, I point this out. It's known in nutritional science that 21 units of beta carotene are needed to make 1 unit of vitamin A.
Right.
Any amount of vitamin A you see in a carrot or a sweet potato, divide that by 21.
Right. And some people can convert at that rate, but I would opine that some people convert at a much lower rate than that. And that's why some people can eat vegan for a while and seemingly do okay because they're pretty good converters. But other people do bad almost immediately. And I would say that they're the ones who cannot convert beta carotene into vitamin A and then the fake vitamin E into real vitamin E to the vitamin B12 precursors. They just cannot make these conversions and they get sick very quickly on a plant-based diet, whereas other people seemingly thrive or at least get by for a few years before they start to get sick.
Then they crash.
Exactly.
There's a different event horizon for everybody on a plant-based diet, but I want to say invariably people crash on a plant-based diet. It's only a matter of time.
Oh, let's talk about this. This is great. I just popped it up on the screen. So I have looked and I have tweeted multiple times. Can somebody please share with me a case report or any kind of written up academic level research showing any human ever in the history of humanity who got vitamin A toxicity, vitamin E toxicity, or vitamin D toxicity from eating real food, including polar bear liver? Show me a case report where that's written up. And I have yet to get a link to any study, and I cannot find a study anywhere where any human, even once in the history of humanity, has gotten vitamin A toxicity from eating liver, even polar bear liver, which is supposed to be toxic with vitamin A. Have you found a study? I've
never found a study. I do reference the polar bear study in my book. It's observational. Polar bear liver has about 100,000 times more vitamin A than cow's liver, so it's a completely different thing. And we don't know whether it was cadmium in the polar bear liver or something else that could have been happening to people. Right. It's all kind of historical folklore. I've never seen a report of anyone getting toxicity from vitamin A related to food.
Right. If people want to eat chicken liver every day or beef liver every day, sheep's liver every day, is there any danger for developing a toxicity at all in the literature?
I don't think so, and if you want to be prudent, don't eat a pound of liver every day, and if you do want to eat a pound of liver every day, check your serum vitamin A and check your CBC and check your comprehensive metabolic panel, right? You can check your labs to see if you are getting vitamin A overload.
Yes.
But as I note in the book, vitamin A palmitate, right? Vitamin A palmitate is different than the vitamin A that's in liver. And vitamin A palmitate is vitamin A on palmitic acid. That's the synthetic vitamin A. So we know this is different, right? We know that synthetic formulations of vitamins are different than what's happening in food. And there's a study that I noticed in pigs where when they feed pigs vitamin A palmitate, which is a supplement, right? Their vitamin A levels just keep going up and up and up. When they feed pigs liver, they kind of level out. So there's something different going on here. And I don't think people need to worry about it. Now, there are strong recommendations from obstetricians not to eat too much vitamin A. You know what? That's fine. Like the recommendation is 10,000 IUs of vitamin A a day, which is 2 ounces of liver per day. I think that's a sweet spot for liver for most people. 1 to 2 ounces of liver per day, totally safe. I've seen people eating way more than that. I ate a lot more liver than that for many months. I eat about 1 to 2 ounces a day now. I'm fine. I don't have vitamin A toxicity. I think we need to worry much more about vitamin A insufficiency. And one of the things we know pretty clearly is that vitamin A insufficiency is going to affect our immune system. Whether we're talking about any virus or any illness, right? Right. We need to make sure that our immune system is healthy, and getting good nutrients from food, from animal food, especially enough vitamin A, is crucial for that. That's pretty clear.
100%. And regardless if you're talking about the annual virus that everybody catches, or the virus du jour that everybody's talking about right now, vitamin A and vitamin D are what we used to think vitamin C was. Do you agree with that?
I couldn't agree with that more. That's a great statement. And you know what? I'm going to tell people something else that's kind of radical here. Vitamin D is probably more than vitamin D. I worry a little bit about supplementation with vitamin D and people not getting real ultraviolet light.
Yes.
And I think that there are so many benefits to real ultraviolet light beyond vitamin D. And so,
100%.
Yes, vitamin D is beneficial. And most of the studies that have been done with vitamin D show a discordance between vitamin D from the sun and vitamin D from a supplement. And so I did a podcast with Malcolm Kendrick, again, talking about lipids. I haven't posted this one yet on my podcast, which is called Fundamental Health, you guys, if you want to check out my podcast. But what we know is that for healthy vasculature, we need nitric oxide, and we need the endothelial nitric oxide synthase to work. Well, what do we make when we're in the sun? We make nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is made in the sun, and you can't get that from a vitamin D pill. Is it any wonder that all of us, feel better in the sun?
Yeah, let's talk about Gemma's comment. She thinks that being in the sun ages you.
Right.
I could not agree with that more than I do. And I'm not being disrespectful, but I used to believe that back in 2003 when I was a doctor. I would tell you to hide in a cave and put on SPF 150 sunblock.
You couldn't disagree with
that.
that?
Age you, and the sun will cause skin cancer.
Right.
But I actually have a chapter in my book about how that's complete and utter hooey. The research that proved that was just idiotic research done on donated human foreskin skin. That's what most of the research was done on. Or they did it in vitro with a few cells in a petri dish, and they would not even look for cancer. They would look for markers that they considered to be markers for precancerous conditions. The research is just phooey. It's idiotic. The sun, we've only been playing in the sun as hominids for 2 or 3 million years. But back in 1970, we discovered, the sun will give you cancer and age you. No, it's a myth. It's not true. Check out the chapter in my book about that. It's absolutely unfounded. The sun is good for you. The sun is your best friend. Don't get a sunburn,
right,
but please get a healthy tan as often as you can.
And I think so many of these things are intuitive for humans. Your body will tell you when you've been in the sun too long. Your body will tell you when you've been in the sun too long.
Just like if you're breathing too fast, your body will give you feedback. If you've run too long, it'll give you feedback. If you eat too much liver, it'll give you feedback. If you eat too much salt, it'll go, ooh, that's too much salt.
Exactly.
If you get too much sun, you start to get pink and tender. That means get your stupid ass out of the sun.
But until you get to that point, it's probably beneficial for you.
Yes.
And in the book, I talk about the fact that, again, this is observational research, but the more sun exposure people get, the higher the microbial diversity in their gut. Well, that could be the exercise they're doing in the sun, or it could actually be the sun. But
that's right.
What we know,
I fully believe, Doc, that there are things that the sun does with the human body that we haven't discovered yet, because all research on that kind of thing stopped when doctors decided that sunlight causes skin cancer. Nobody, if you'd even said, hey, I really think that being in the sun over and above vitamin D boosts immune function. I'd like to do a study about that. If you had said that back in the 70s or 80s at Harvard, they would have kicked you out. They'd be like, get out. You're not our kind of people. You don't belong here. And so basically that whole arm of research died. No one is asking, is the sun beneficial for us in other ways? Because they'd be laughed out of their university. But hopefully my book and Paul's book and these kinds of conversations will give PhD students and graduate students the balls to say, hey, I think the sun does other good things for us. And there's enough of a question about that out in the medical community now. I really think we need to do a study about that.
And speaking of balls and, corresponding female parts, if you guys have ever sunbathed naked, I would recommend that. Maybe don't do it in like rural, like in urban Nashville or wherever you are. But if you can go somewhere and get fully naked in the sun, don't burn your privates, but it's pretty good experience. I'm just saying, sun anywhere on your body feels good.
Are you going to post about that on your Instagram?
Maybe tomorrow. I believe it's called perineum sunning. And
I've heard about it. I saw Dave Asprey doing it, and I was like, Yeah, that probably is good, and it's a thing, but I really did not need to see Dave Asprey in that anatomical position.
Like so, up in the stirrups, like he's gonna have a baby. So, you can do it in the private of your own home. Maybe you guys have backyards. Just go out in the sun naked a little bit. It's really freeing. It feels good. Don't get burned if those areas, but any part of your body in the sun is going to be good for you. I think that's one of the most underutilized medications we have. And isn't it interesting? We can bring this conversation full circle. Think about the underutilized medications that we have, right, from Western medicine that are not being offered to patients. Diet, lifestyle, low carb, sun, like these are the answers. And so someone asked a great question: how do you get skin cancer?
Yeah,
and it's multifactorial.
Yes. Number one, diet. You're building your skin, your cell membranes from bad fats.
Exactly.
Plus, number two, your body is chronically inflamed from the inflammatory plant foods that Paul talks about in his book. And what else, Doc?
Well, if your cell membranes, like you said, are full of highly oxidizable oils, going in the sun might be a bad thing. But in the setting of a good diet, just like in the setting of a good diet, LDL is beneficial. In the setting of a good diet, you're going to burn less. That's been observed many times on ketogenic and carnivore diets. And then your cell membranes are made of the right things, right? And so the other thing I want to mention is there's multiple types of cancer. There's squamous, there's basal, there's melanoma. People are worried about melanoma, but there's good research. They should be. There's good research that people who have low-level chronic sun exposure have lower rates of melanoma.
Oh, absolutely. And I talk about that study in my book. Daytime laborers who like menial laborers who work in the sun all day long at the equator have less skin cancer than people who are fully clothed in Nordic countries. And then also you get melanoma in places that have never seen the sun unless Paul's idea takes off and there are new beaches everywhere. There may be a resurgence in the nude beach thing now that you've said that. But so think about that. If you move from Norway to the equator, the amount of UV radiation you get goes up by thousands of %. Okay. And a lot of people say, oh, well, the ozone layer is not as thick as it used to be. That's true. It gives us about 10 or 20% more UV radiation. And so just moving on the earth can give you thousands of times more UV radiation. It's not the sun. It's your diet and it's your levels of inflammation in your body. That's what causes skin cancer.
I couldn't agree more. And one of the things I talk about in the book is that there are plant molecules that can affect tumor suppressor genes.
Yep.
The P53 is an oncogene. It's a gene that affects many other genes. It turns genes on and off. We know that plant molecules can affect P53. Do you guys want to know a molecule that affects P53? Curcumin, right? And I'm not saying curcumin causes cancer. I'm just saying plant molecules can affect your genes. And is it positive or negative? Be careful, because it looks like curcumin can do a lot of other negative things in the human body. And I'm going to say this right now just to clarify for people. I'm not saying that plant molecules or molecules in general don't have a pharmaceutical value, but do the benefits outweigh the risks? Are you using curcumin to treat something that is related to a bad diet? In which case, it's not worth it.
Totally agree. We've been going an hour, Doc. I could go with you another hour. We probably need to let the people get back to their lives. Thank you so much. Tell everybody where they can find you, Dr. Saladino, and where they can find your book. And when is the damn Audible going to be out?
Oh my God. I get that question like every time. So guess what, you guys? The Audible is in my voice. So I recorded the Audible myself. It was kind of a labor of love. I did it for you guys. The Audible is coming out in 2 weeks. So the way Audible works is you have to record the whole thing, which took 7 days, right? Took 7 days to record the Audible. Then we have to do the post-processing. Then I had to go back and do the pickups, which are all done. And now we have sent it all to Audible, and it takes Audible 18 days to get it uploaded and all, but the audiobooks should be available in the next few weeks. Believe me, I will announce it. I'll send it to you so you can share it with your tribe. But if you like my podcast or you're familiar with my voice, and what was so cool about it was I got to do the inflection in the words that I wanted to. And if you guys have read my book, it's kind of funny. Like I really wanted to put my voice into it. So the Audible's coming out. You can find the book on Amazon, you guys, thecarnivorecodebook.com. Here it is. It's got a picture of me on the cover and a tiger on the other. But please check it out. Please check Dr. Barry's book out. You can find me. My podcast is called Fundamental Health, and my website is Carnivore MD. you can get the Stay Radical t-shirt. I got to get Dr. Barry one of these.
Hey, I need one of those.
I'm going to get it to you. As soon as I see you, I'm going to get you a Stay Radical t-shirt, and people can find me all those spots.
I love it, brother. Thanks so much for doing this with me today. And if you want to, we can do this again. I think people enjoyed it. If people want so much information that people need that they just don't have access to, and I'm happy to help people understand how to optimize their health, and I know you are too. Yeah, and I think if people get your book and they get my book, they're going to have so much equipment. They're going to have so much defense. Like you said, I think it's really a knowledge equation now, and people feel intimidated by their doctors. We want to empower people. You're doing such a good job of that. We're trying to give you guys information. And so, yeah, get these books and read them, and you'll be so equipped. Absolutely. Absolutely, brother. Thanks so much. I'll talk to you again soon. Thanks so much for the stars and the super chats, guys, on Facebook and YouTube. Thanks to our Facebook supporters and to our patrons on patreon.com for making it possible for me to give you information like this. I ain't ever going to stop, and I hope Dr. Saladino never stops either. I couldn't, man. I can't shut up. I can't stop sharing the good news. Can't stop. See you next time.